I spent 4 days in Sydney. In the first 2 days, I met up with my dear friend, Bruce Marlin, and his family, and they live about an hour north. Bruce and I served together in Calvary Chapel, Budapest for many, many years. He now serves as the administrator of a Christian camp just north of Sydney. Upon arriving in Sydney from Melbourne on that Friday morning, I made a quick connection to a train heading out to the west to a town called Hazelbrook, where Bruce and his family were driving down from their camp up north. And I got in the car there and we continued on to a town where we were going to experience the Zigzag Railway. The railway was originally part of the main line in the late 1800s and early 1900s. In the late 20th century, they started to use it as a cooperative excursion railroad for tourists and families and so on. And it was then closed for major renovations and it just opened in May, just a few months before I got there. Here we get a glimpse of the vintage railroad cars that we'll be traveling on as we zigzag our way down the mountain. You could sense the excitement. The kids were so excited, but the parents, of course, feed off of that and they get to be little kids again themselves. The reason we call this a zigzag railway is simply because if you're going down the side of a hill on this one side of the valley, you go down a certain distance and then you stop, put the engine on the other end of the train, and go down the other place. And so it's a zig and a zag and a zig. We reached one of the points where you go from zigging to zagging. So we got out of the train and climbed up on this platform so we could watch them reverse the engine from the front of the train to the rear, which of course will now be the front. The locomotive will now go down to the other end of our train, get hooked up, and take us on from there.
I knew he was going to do that. That's good. Time to water the train. Fill it up in the boiler. We've got enough coal, but they need more water for the boiler because it turned into steam. That's why they call them steam engines. They get thirsty.
After the visit to the Zigzag Railway, I traveled back with Bruce and his family to their home, which is actually located at Camp Kedron. Bruce, his wife Gail, and their son Joshua reside on the property. Bruce has been serving there for over 10 years as the administrator. Camp Kedron provides a range of opportunities for camping and retreats for churches, as well as holiday camps for primary and secondary high school students. As you can see, the camp is located in a beautiful environment. It's only about a 15-minute drive from there over to the Pacific Ocean, so you can have some water-based activities as well. The next morning, we drove down from Camp Kedron down to Calvary Chapel of Sydney for their Sunday morning service. It's located actually in a suburb northwest of Sydney called Castle Hill. I've often reflected on the fact that God's church is big worldwide, but very small. And I was surprised to discover that the pastor Ken at Calvary Sydney is actually from San Diego County, from a Calvary Chapel near to the Calvary Chapel that sent me out 20 years ago to the mission field in Hungary. And now they're serving the Lord for the last 14 years in Australia. After church, I took a bus into downtown Sydney, where I was going to be staying at a youth hostel, which I can only describe as 5-star, not just because of the facility, but also because of the view. You can see here the Sydney Opera House, which is a landmark, as well as the road going over the famous Sydney Harbour Bridge. Talk about a 5-star view. You don't have to stay in a big fancy hotel to get a rooftop view like this. The Opera House recently celebrated its 50th anniversary, and it has been designated by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, which it certainly deserves. It is a good thing that I don't own a MacBook or an iPhone because I could have spent the rest of my travel budget in there. The next morning, I headed out from downtown Sydney across to the north shore of the harbor, where we will find the Taronga Zoo, and I'll spend most of today taking a look at all the wonderful sights. As we head across the harbor, on the left, of course, you get the great view of the Sydney Harbor Bridge, which is over 1 kilometer long, 132 meters above the water, and it was opened officially in 1932, almost a century ago, still in great shape. And I'll be walking across that tomorrow to see what's on the other side, because why not? The Taronga Zoo is built on the side of a hill, laid out, and we're approaching the dock, which is at the bottom of the zoo. The entrance is up at the top, so there's a shuttle bus here waiting for us to take us up to the top, and where I'll go into the park and work my way gradually through the day back down to the ferry landing. Even though I'm going to be focusing on the animals more than the people, I wanted to give you an idea of what the park looks like in general with the big trees and the wide open spaces. It's very, very beautiful and well laid out. If you've ever heard someone use the phrase when people are just goofing off, oh, they're just monkeying around, I think this little clip here will give you an idea where that phrase got its origin. The kid in me just couldn't resist this picture. Gigantic gorilla. Obviously not real. When people think of a python, they think of a really, really long snake, but not all of them are. Stimson's python only grows to be about 1 meter long, as you'll see right now. This python is actually native to Australia and feeds on smaller animals, as you can tell. On the other hand, the olive python, which can grow up to 4 to 5 meters in length, it doesn't care what it eats. It basically preys on anything it can squeeze to death, regardless. As you can see, he's a big boy. I'm guessing this little iguana got its name because its head looks a little bit like a rhinoceros. There he is. Some lions prefer to do their sunbathing. In this particular case, the male lion decided he wanted to spend some quality time with his lioness mate up on the sun deck. So how's he going to get up there? No problem. Hey, honey, I'm home. This little guy is called a meerkat. He's one of my favorites because he's doing what I used to do in the U.S. Navy. He's actually standing on watch. The other meerkats are down below, and they actually take turns rotating on the watch. And so you can't quite see it from here, but he's not just staring straight ahead. You'll watch his head turn left, center, right on a rotation, standing watch. These elephants seem to be a little bit smaller than the ones you're accustomed to seeing in zoos. These are Asian elephants, and I guess the African elephants are about 50% larger. Nevertheless, these guys, they're pretty big. They probably eat about 100 kilos of food per day, but they have really bad digestive systems, and they don't get a lot of nutrition out of it. And they also drink about 100 liters of water per day. Another interesting fact I discovered was they have like 40,000 muscles in their trunk alone. That's how their trunk is so versatile in everything that they use it to do.
Remember, he's about 240 kilos. It's a pretty impressive leap. If you're ready, on the count of three, 1, 2, 3. Jump, Diego! I thought you did a pretty good job, but let's ask Diego. Buddy, was that loud enough for you? He said no. Tell you what, there's a lot of you out there this afternoon. Let's try once more, a bit louder if you can manage it. On the count of three, 1, 2, 3.
Jump, Diego!
Beautiful leap from Diego.
That evening, I went downtown just so I could get this great picture of the Sydney Harbor Bridge at night. Headed back to my hostel for a good night's sleep, and then the next day I headed on over to walk across that 1 kilometer long bridge. I got my morning cardio in, walking up the steps to the bridge, 160 meters or 500 feet above the water level. You get some great views from the bridge. And at first, I thought maybe this cruise ship was just paying a port visit to Sydney. But later, I found out that that's the opposite. This is its home base. I think there were 5,000 people leaving the ship while I was there, and another 5,000 getting back on as they take cruises out to the South Pacific from here, Tahiti, and so on and so forth. This is a quick view of North Sydney on the opposite side of the bridge from downtown. Downtown's got all the skyscrapers and the modern stuff, and this looks like it could be a typical British or English village in England, maybe in Scotland, the style of architecture. This is more like, I think, probably the original Sydney looked like, 150 years ago. It could be a very quaint, middle-sized British town. Came across this walking street. It seemed like it was a combination of arts and crafts and tea houses and coffee shops. The crosswalk looks pretty typical, but I had to smile at the sign underneath the pictures of the people. It says aged. In other words, the old folks take longer to get across the street. After my morning hike over and back on the Sydney Harbor Bridge, back downtown, I got on a ferry and headed north. There are a series of beaches on the north of Sydney on the Pacific coast there. And we were headed for the town of Manly, where Bruce was coming over from where he lives at the camp. And we were going to meet and have some fellowship and see the little town, beach town, and maybe have a coffee too. Well, San Diego, you're not the only guys with beaches. And I'm on the Pacific Ocean here, at the Pacific Ocean, not in it. And it's a spring day here in Australia. That's why the beach isn't so crowded. Been on the cool side, maybe about 20 Celsius. About 70, 72 on the air temperature. A bit breezy. First time I've seen the Pacific Ocean south of the equator. All in all, it was a great time in Sydney. Just in 4 days, we had time to fellowship with the Marlins, go on a zigzag railroad, get some fellowship in with the Calvary Chapel in Australia, with the pastors from San Diego, and the zoo, and some beach time. Really great time.